Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Dan Hill. And Dan and I are going to talk about, well, everything to do with the employee experience, really. I've put in the title of The Great Resignation, but it could be the Great Reset. It could be the silent quitting. It could be, it could be anything, really. I mean, all of these things, I think, actually has been happening for years. It's just that we've suddenly placed names against them. But before we dive in, I always get my guests to introduce themselves right up front, so you can get your little bit in and say where people can find you, and if they think you're interesting, then they can come and talk to you further.
Sure. Well, I think I'm most famous for my book called Emotionomics, which Philip Kotler called a revelation. Essentially, I was arguing that there are two currencies in business: dollars or pounds, etc.,
Yeah.
and emotions, and that emotions have been given short shrift, and that essentially we're not emotionally intelligent, literate as to how we approach customers and employees. So I'm sure we'll get into that. If people want to reach me or find out about my actually 10 books at this point, there's my website with the obligatory 3 W's, sensorylogic.com. You could even email me personally at dhill@sensorylogic.com. All of that works fine by me.
Thanks, Dan. And I agree with you. I think that where do we start? So let's actually start with what have you seen? What changes have you seen that have taken place in the last couple of years in terms of employee experience, if anything at all?
Well, I think the thing that's really gotten the executives' attention is, lo and behold, their workers are leaving them. So the great resignation, the great reset, whatever you want to call it. Now, there are some demographic factors here. I'll be a little bit U.S. centric, but one is thanks to Donald Trump, the immigration numbers came down. So there are fewer workers available. There are also boomers who are retiring and saying, I've had enough of this, and they're moving out. So those are certainly two factors. But I think the other one, besides just crummy pay and crummy hours in some circumstances, is COVID-19 gave us, a life and death moment.
Yeah.
And when it came, it also said, geez, is this the career I wanted? Is this the way I want to be treated at work? Do I feel respected, valued? Am I truly an essential worker, or essential only in that I need my hands to show up, at 9 a.m. to help get the work done? And I think that caused a real moral, emotional awakening for people and a lot of shifting. And I think that's the most exciting thing. And I think the most troubling but ongoing issue is also, of course, inclusiveness. And I say that because I'm talking to people from St. Paul, Minnesota. Probably less than 3 miles from here is where George Floyd was murdered. And so I'm really at the epicenter of what creates, at least in America, a real storm about saying, geez, now you can finally see it right here on the video. This is the experience some people have. Now, it's much more subtle in the workplace, fortunately, but a lot of bosses are bullies. So the violence involved is emotional, it's psychological, even if it's only more rarely physical and not to the extent, of course, in the video itself.
And so I agree with you. I think a lot of people actually sat at home and said, is this what I want to do? Do I really want to commute into whatever city it is for the rest of my life? And then we were given the opportunity not to have to do that.
Yeah.
And then actually we found out that people actually work harder when they're at home because they kind of feel guilty that they're not in the office. And so this big working from home experiment that took place around the world actually worked. I now rarely travel. I generally sit here and I can do business around the world, which I always knew. It's just that technology has been accepted. Where do you think that's gonna lead us in terms of my partner has a 27-year-old and he's just gone through a process of getting a new job. He thinks completely different from the way that I would go about getting a job. He wants to know if the company supports environmental issues. He wants to know if the company, what is the diversity policy? Is there a diversity policy? Am I going to turn up and everybody's white? He's just it's so sophisticated in terms of so I'm talking a lot. Sorry. What's your view on that?
No, I agree with you very much. I mean, I think the place I would start is culture, branding, the importance of branding. When I did the original version of Emotionomics that I alluded to in the introduction, I had branding in the marketplace chapter. When I came out now with a Emotionomics 2.0, a 15-year anniversary update, I moved it up front because it really applies both to the marketplace and absolutely to the workplace. Because in the war for talent, people are saying and using the very criteria you just mentioned. They want to know what's going on in that place. How's it going to feel? What's going to be the experience? And I think for the longest time, and even now, quite honestly, I think the executives don't want to take a hard look at it. I did a book a bit ago called Blah, 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 a snarky guide to office lingo. I crowdsourced it. One of the people was an HR expert. She gave me the definition that HR was the Kleenex lady. In other
Right.
words, they just thought I was, poo, poo, poo. I'm feeling bad. So it's just a kind of a macho dismissal of all of the issues, all the experiences come up in the workplace. And one executive I quoted in the book said, I leave feelings for Barry Manilow. In other words, it's kind of effeminate to even take on the issue. And because most leaders are still male, that's the paradigm we're suffering under.
I mean, I'm friends with a leader within a bank here in the UK, and he is a classic person that likes to be in the office and likes to have all these people so he can look out from his terminal and
Sure.
see all the people sitting there. And then what happens? He's sitting at home, and he said, I can't manage or lead people anymore." I mean, managing people through screens. This must be a massive change for leaders, especially people that are used to saying, "Steve's taken more than an hour for lunch."
Yeah, no, it creates a lot of paranoia, certainly for those who realize that their payroll is the biggest expense they have.
Mm.
And it's led to some unsavory practices like the remote monitoring now of people's websites.
Yeah.
I know, for instance, there's actually something out there you can buy that automatically moves your mouse every
Yes.
now and
Yeah. I've
again,
seen that.
so
Yeah.
that you're verified that you're still alive and breathing and eligible for the paycheck. But let's go back to part of that last question I maybe didn't quite get around to. So yes, there was this massive move to remote working, but let's admit that there was a class element to that. I always say if it's a movie about illicit love, then it's French movie, but if it's about class, it's a British movie, because class still exists and it certainly exists in America. And so, the workers who were frontline, lower down on the economic food chain, they didn't have that choice.
Yeah.
And even for those who embraced the remote and were very productive under that format, there are some downsides. One is they're getting pressured a lot from the executives who are nervous to come back into the office. Another one is, do you have a manager who's got the EQ, the emotional intelligence skills, to still create some sense of camaraderie, interchange, morale? I think there are ways to do that. We can get into that. I think one other issue is there are, especially in the US, there are women and minorities who said, I'm really relieved to be remote because I'm tired of the microaggressions
Yeah.
in the office. And I totally sympathize with that. On the other hand, it's probably true that if they already fear they're being invisible and passed over for the promotions, they could be even more at risk of that in an environment where a uncaring executive or manager is very selective on who they interact with, as opposed to being forced to interact with everyone because they're right there under the thumb.
Yeah. It's interesting. My partner's 27-year-old. He likes going into the office twice a week, but he sees it as a social thing. They go drinking afterwards. It's very much a social thing. So he actually wants the office. I thought he'd be supporting the remoteness, but actually it's not the case.
I do think that occasionally being in the office, it could be more of the social thing. It could be a really key project. I think when you have to get to the like taking on something that you almost suspect is going to fail, it's an initiative that's been
Mm.
handed down to you from on high, and you're trying to, game plan it and avert a disaster. I think discussing the hard issues in person or really innovating and trying to move out of this is how we've always done it. Those strike me in addition to the social aspect of being valuable opportunities to get together, because we can do a lot remote. And as a facial coder, I can tell you that Zoom is a blessing as far as I'm concerned, because people are facing the camera in most cases, and as opposed to being down the conference table and 12 feet away with an oblique view, you can get a much better sense of how people are feeling. That said, in person, I still think there's just a connectiveness, a warmth, a fuller sense that you know how this person's behaving, that makes it conducive to certain situations. So that kind of hybrid model, I think, is attractive and probably viable for all except for the tyrants who insist everyone comes back all the time.
So what do you think that leaders should be doing to support the employee experience that people are expecting now?
Oh my God, there's so many things. One you've already kind of alluded to, including through George Floyd. We simply need more diversity. I guess this is on my mind because if you look at the 100 biggest TV events in America in the past year, 75 of them were National Football League games, three quarters. So they really drive a lot of the culture here in the stateside. It's our version of soccer, what you call football, of course.
Mm,
Well, it turns out that 9% of the head coaches are Black.
right.
56% of the players are Black.
Yeah.
At one point 10 years ago, briefly, 20% of the managers were Black, but that's collapsed by half. One of the things I really want to make sure I brought up today was, if we're going to talk about inclusiveness, walk the talk.
Mm,
Lip service does not do a lot. How can we not look at who's in the executive branch? One of the reasons why the NFL coaches said, well, I didn't get the job because sometimes they'd say to the person they checked, well, I just relate to you. You have the same experiences as me. It's comfort level. Do you choose the comfort level of the executives, or do you choose the growth zone that the company needs? Because frankly, let's take the UK. I heard on the coverage with the royal funeral that when she came to the throne, I think they said one out of every 200 Brits was other than, Caucasian. It's now 1 out of 7.
yeah.
So, the marketplace, your workplace, your pool of talent has radically shifted. And I can tell you, at least stateside, you go through LinkedIn and you look at the executive teams of company after company, you're going to come up with another definition for my book, blah, 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 which was diversity in senior management, a short white guy.
Yeah.
We just don't have it. So I think you gotta give the signals. People do have different experiences, vantage points. And even if it's not by skin color or by gender, how about intellectual diversity?
Yeah.
We used to always say it when I worked in corporate life, oh, here's the new executive, or here's a new consultant. In each case, they looked an awful lot like the other people who had hired them in. We just haven't seen it. So here's something I would really love that I think would send a broad signal. When you are hiring someone, actually have more than one candidate, make them each do a town hall event where they answer questions and present to the employee base, who gets to vote on which one they think has the most warmth, the most, get up and go, the most on the ball intellectually, the most likelihood, bottom line, to make the company culture feel better and to propel the company into a prosperous future. Wouldn't that be revolutionary, as opposed to keeping it with the headhunters and the executive team and the board of directors, and it's all this closed cobble of leaders making the choices?
Wouldn't that be great to do that?
Yeah,
Yes.
democracy. I mean, it's an issue front and center here in America right now. I would love to see more democracy in the workplace. You want to lift the engagement rates. I mean, right now the engagement rate depends on how you measure. Is it fully engaged, or at least they're engaged? You're talking about numbers like 17%, 22%, those kinds of numbers. My God, what company wants to throw away 4/5 of their payroll expense because people aren't really engaged? And
Yeah.
yet they tolerate it, and they shouldn't have to, but then there's something incumbent on them to make a change so that it's possible to get those numbers higher.
So what else do you think? I love, you got any more radical ideas for changing culture then?
Oh, I do. Believe me, I'm full of them.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm sure you are, Dan. Come on, share some. Come on, because
here's
the
one.
chat's gone ballistic. You've got to come on. We're loving it.
Well, let's look at innovation, because that's another place where executives are like, "Oh my God, this place isn't innovative, but we have to keep changing." even though they're not changing. So my response is you should actually use a model where you're prepared to submarine your own company. You are actually saying, what's our weaknesses? Take the people on the front line who deal with the customers directly, who are at the call centers, the people who are per department. They know what's really going on. They just never get the chance to say it. So if you re-envision your product line, your advertising, how you're onboarded at a company, if you open the floodgates anonymously or otherwise and let people actually give lots of ideas, you can make changes. And let me go back to this one about your product line, your services, your offers. um, Take a team of employees who maybe volunteer for the assignment and say, imagine you're our new upstart rival company. Every executive fears the band in the garage who's going to open a new company and destroy them in 5 years time. Do it in house,
Doing
see what
that.
they come up with, and learn from it and adapt from it, steal from it. There's a wonderful cliche from Wall Street that said, God gave you eyes, plagiarize. So plagiarize internally as well as externally and figure out how you can change. So that's just a few other ways I think you can democratize. We can keep going with this.
I think that's a great idea in terms of, to stay ahead, you've got to innovate. And one of the ways of doing that, as you said, is actually saying, okay, if we were starting this company new, what would we do, and what would we do better?
Yeah, and blow out the cobwebs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go to the manager, because we know that employees leave, on a big picture thing. Yes, the executives are in charge of culture, but on a daily basis, motivation and engagement and all that comes down to the manager, and people leave because of the managers way too often. The statistic that caused me to write the blah, blah, blah book was that I had two conversations in a row where people almost casually alluded to the fact that the estimate out there is that at least 25% of all bosses are bullies.
Yeah.
And I went, oh my God. And then I thought through my executive experiences or leadership experiences, and 40% of my bosses were bullies by my counting before I started my own company. So that's just a terrible number. So yes, first of all, I'd like to expunge these people. I mean, either lift their game or get out.
Yeah.
Maybe they got promoted because they were good at the hard skills, but they're not good at the soft skills. The new manager actually has to be a cultivator of talent. I think
Yeah.
that's their primary role, and otherwise they should back off an awful lot.
Yeah,
Um,
I've always wanted people who work for me to come in and say, I want, if I say, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? I
yeah,
want them to say, I want to be sitting in your chair,
yeah,
because
or,
that means I know that you're hungry.
yeah,
If you want to take my place, that's great. That's not a threat to me.
yeah, because you're hoping you're going to move up, or you're going to,
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because
the rising
and
tide. Yeah.
it all goes up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think very much so. Another thing, just really tactical. When you come in as a boss, you got a new employee, give them some time actually. You know, sit with them in the first couple of months and, every week and say, how's it going? Or better yet, involve a committee of two or three other voices who have other experiences at different levels within the department, for instance, or the business unit. So you know what's going on, because a lot of people leave real quickly. You might win the war for talent near term, and then long term, they're gone. They're out the door because they realize this isn't the place for them.
So one final question, Dan.
Sure.
The at the moment, there's a war for talent, or there's an expected war for talent. What is it that people should be doing to get the best talent into their organization?
They need curiosity. They need open-mindedness to experience. So I think the key question you should ask is, what excites you? What do you want to accomplish? But even better is, what's your return on mistakes? What are the
Right.
mistakes you've made? What did you learn from them? How did you grow as a result of that? I mean, I think that's the exciting question. I want people who are burning with curiosity and aren't
Yes.
readily satisfied. And if I
Yeah.
don't have those, then I just have people who are eager for a paycheck and looking to hide in some cubicle someplace until 5 o'clock. That's not exciting. That's not a good way to live either, by the way.
Yeah. We got a customer, and they hired somebody recently, and they lasted 5 months.
Yeah.
But their CV said, what we're looking, it ticked the CV ticked all the boxes. But
Yeah.
what they lacked is the curiosity. What they lacked is the I'm trying to think what the willingness to take risks, the willingness to experiment. And what the business wanted actually is people that with that curiosity and that willingness to experiment and maybe fail, but at least that they tried.
At least they tried. Absolutely. No, I would go back to, I remember when I was in the Ivy League, I took a really course from a wonderful woman, and she had a guy who just gave the placid, safe answer. And she looked at him with a withering look and said, "Do you really believe what you just said?" And he couldn't come up with the answer because, of course, it was no. And she turned away from him. And then we all went on to have a really good semester and learn from each other. But that guy did not contribute. It's also detrimental to your colleagues because, what's exciting is you're getting someplace together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I could have talked to you for an hour, but it's 20 minutes.
Sure.
So
Fair enough.
thank you so much for coming on. Loads of chat, loads of comments, and I appreciate everybody that's joined in as well. Remind everybody where they can get hold of you.
The obligatory 3 W's, sensorylogic.com. Even better, my email address, dhill@sensorylogic.com, like your 5 senses.
And you're on LinkedIn as well, aren't you?
I am on LinkedIn, so I will accept, if you send me an invite or if you're already part of my crew, that's great.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan, for coming on. I'm just going to put the final comment, which is that's thanking us as well. Thank you, and really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.